Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Manchester City have been very active in this January transfer window, and today we're going to look at everything you need to know about Abdukodir Khusanov. Hopefully I've not butchered that. The first ever Uzbekistan international to play in the Premier League. I had to learn more about this guy, so I've gone and got in touch with Jonathan, who is a League One correspondent, a French football expert, to ask his opinion on Abdukodir Khusanov and what we can expect. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on, mate. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Happy New Year, and thanks a lot for having me on. It's been a while, but glad to be back with you.
Are we in the Happy New Year stage? I like that you've gone for that. I used to do that all the time until the end of January, and no one's done that for a long time, so I actually respect that. Happy New Year to you too, mate. I might just say that until the end of the year, really. It has been a while. Who was it we talked about last time? I've totally forgotten. It was
I
like three,
think it
four.
was when PSG came up against City, which, funnily enough, timing's good because that's happening next week as well.
It is indeed. Well, then maybe we could do a slight PSG tease at the end of this. I don't know. Maybe this video actually goes out after that, depending on when it's all announced, or anything like that. But for now, we've signed a player. I'll be totally honest with you that I didn't know anything about than a viral clip of how fast he could run. Went online a few months ago. Abdukodir Khusanov, a 21-year-old, he'll be 22 in February, centre back for a deal of around 40 million euros, which is an awful lot of money for anyone. Never mind a man inexperienced as Khusanov is. Of course, with Lens, he's only been playing over in France for 18 months now. I'll start with this video. We'll go through many things. We'll go through your reaction. We'll go through his general form, his strengths, his weaknesses, his potential. And at the end, a summary of what you expect and your feel on this on his squad role. Jonathan, so initially, what was your reaction when you'd heard that Manchester City were in for Khusanov and then had also agreed a deal for the young centre back?
I mean, my initial reaction was one of surprise, given sort of the situation City have been in terms of their form in the last couple of months, and the fact that they'd be looking for somebody who's not really tried and tested at the top level in Europe, despite having come on leaps and bounds in a relatively short period of time with Lens. In terms of seeing Khusanov potentially on the move in the January window, that wasn't that surprising because he's been rumoured to be of interest to a number of top clubs. PSG were one of them who were sort of keeping tabs on him and were expected to potentially make a move. Lens' financial situation dictated that they had to sell multiple players this month. They already did with Brice Samba, the former Nottingham Forest goalkeeper, and Khusanov was the other player who was identified as the one that they could really potentially cash in on and ultimately look to try and balance their books with. So Khusanov going, not a huge surprise, but very much surprising given the players that City have been targeting in general in the January window, because many of them are players with significant upside, not sort of necessarily the immediate experience and level that you would expect to sort of arrest the situation that City have been in up until recent results.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was. I felt like it was a bit of a surprise in general across football. I saw one article today that said it's quite an extraordinary transfer, given, his status in the world of football still, given that, I think people don't realise he only signed for about £80,000, €100,000 from a Belarusian team 18 months ago. So he's had a meteoric rise, basically, and barely played much football, has he? Has he been a regular for Lens this season and the season before when he joined?
Well, he's broken into the team this season. He was being bled into the starting 11 last season, but the change of manager from Francaise to Will Still has obviously benefited him, because Will Still has been moving away from some of the guys who were sort of established members of the starting 11 under his predecessor, and Khusanov is one of the players who's benefited from that. So last season, many people might remember him from making a cameo against Arsenal in the Champions League, for example, but he hasn't had that same development this season because Lens crashed out of Europe very early, but he has been playing quite regularly in Ligue 1. You could say that's obviously been a huge step up, because when he initially arrived in northern France, he was playing with the reserves briefly at the beginning, and then was essentially a squad member. So it has been a meteoric rise, but also his potential has been quite clear from the moments that he first sort of took his first few steps for Lens. And it wasn't really a huge surprise knowing that Will Still was looking to sort of stamp his mark on this Lens side, that he would look to shuffle a few players around, and Khusanov was one of the ones that was brought in. And I think once they realised there was actual potential for Khusanov to maybe bring in a fairly significant amount of money in a relatively short space of time, I think he's obviously been pushed to the forefront of their plans even more. So the fact that he has become an established member of the starting 11 almost overnight, has been as surprising for the Lens fans as it has for, City fans who probably have only just discovered that he even exists, let alone that he's, barely got sort of 18 months of experience under his belt.
Yeah, I'd never pretend to know someone I don't know. I think that's a way I try and approach these things. And this guy, I think it's fair to say that if you're not paying attention to League One, there's a good chance you might not know who he is. And I think that seems fair. How is his form compared to maybe other centre backs in the league? Like, I'm not expecting you to come on this and tell me it's been perfect or anything like that. I mean, look, honesty is the best policy here. You might tell me that. I don't know either way. But was he rated? This season with his form. Has his form improved from last season, for example, when he first broke into the team? How has he been viewed as? How important has he been viewed for Lens, for example? Compared to other players. I'm just generally curious about what his perception was of his overall form this season.
Well, I mean, he's a player who's been seen as, a developing talent, somebody who has a lot of potential but needs work in order to get there. Is a potential gem, essentially, that sort of needs shining and conditioning, in order to ultimately reach the finished product level. The parallels that I would go for, I'd actually take a player that City signed a couple of years ago, Josko Gvardiol, when Gvardiol was sort of breaking through and earning rave reviews in Croatia. He sort of has that kind of similar aspects to to his potential, but obviously Gvardiol, even when he was in Croatia, was playing regularly at a bit of a higher level, given that Dinamo were sort of regulars in the Champions League. Whereas for Khusanov, he started off with an Uzbeki powerhouse club, but didn't really make the grade in their youth academy, as you mentioned earlier, then made the jump to Belarus, where he was at a fairly small team who I think had like one or, a very small number of seasons in the top flight.
I think 1,500 fans per game. I remember reading about it. So it's really like he earned his stripes, put it that way.
Yeah, and then got picked up by Lens, and nobody really knew what to expect because the transfer fee was so relatively low, as you mentioned. And then suddenly when he came in, I think people were pleasantly surprised by, the sort of level he was able to show for Lens. And that's why you started seeing him get progressively more minutes. Some of the regular members of the starting 11 had begun to wane a little bit towards the end of Franquez's time there. I think there was, some shared fatigue from everyone, given how well Lens have performed since getting back to Ligue 1, going on this pretty magical ride, which ended with them finishing second in Ligue 1 and getting into the Champions League, and then that return to the Champions League decades after their last foray into Europe, I think took its toll on a lot of people. And Khusanov was one of the players who was sort of there in a position to pick up the slack from some of the guys who had played a big role in that. And obviously those minutes grew more and more, towards the end of last season. And then with the change of manager, with Will still coming in and wanting to essentially make it a new start for everyone, Khusanov was one of the players that, he recognised he might be able to build, the defence in the team around. There were some, other circumstances out of everyone's control. Kevin Danso was expected to move to Roma and then failed his medical and was out of action for a little while. So I think those kind of incidents created a little bit of an opportunity that Khusanov really stepped up and grabbed hold of.
Yeah.
There's been a little bit of uproar as well that he's managed to keep Jonathan Johnson out of the team, who essentially is somebody who's been a massive part of Lens rising back to the top level in France and then getting back into Europe. I think although many people suspected at first it was maybe a little bit too much too soon, because he's quite a level-headed, down-to-earth and mature kid for his age, I think they realised that actually, it's not him biting off more than he can chew. He is able to support those kind of expectations, and has actually been one of the more consistent performers so far this season for a Lens side who are still very difficult to go up against in Ligue 1. PSG will be playing them before going up against City, funnily enough, in the Champions League. And that, in my opinion, is a very good sort of level preparation game in terms of how big that PSG City game will be in the Champions League next week.
So, what are we talk about the player more directly because obviously that's his background, general form, and his sort of rise to prominence. What would you say, and we'll get onto his weaknesses as well because you want to sort of do a thorough kind of breakdown of him. But what would you say his strengths are? I presume he's nominally a centre back, by the way. Has he played anywhere else for Lens? Or is he just mainly a centre back?
I think he's been tested at fullback, but again, that was just when Lens were sort of getting a feel for the player that they'd invested in and working out if there was maybe a way for him to work in a different position, because it was quite clear very early on that, he was a player of significant talent, but they didn't know if they could sort of take the gamble of immediately putting him in such an important position as the central defenders, because it's worth bearing in mind that, especially given the system that Lens have had in place over the last couple of years that has had so much success in Ligue 1, it primarily is based around three central defenders. So if one of those pieces is sort of a weak link, the whole rest of the formation kind of falls apart a little bit. And Will still hasn't exactly done away with that. He's just gone for a different combination with different pieces. But obviously Francaise, given that he knew what he had at the time in getting Lens to the Champions League and then trying to remain competitive, I don't think he was really as motivated to take the gamble on Khusanov as somebody like Will Still was, because Will Still's briefing when he came in was a lot of these players are going to be sold. You're going to have to deal with a lot of moving parts, especially in the first season. And I think that's why he elected to bring in somebody like Khusanov, because he probably expected that one of the, the older central defenders, like a Danso or a Grady or perhaps even a Facundo Medina, would have been moving on first. But given Khusanov's explosion in terms of form and consistency and performances, is actually him who's sort of caught the eye of a big money suitor before any of the other guys.
So he's been playing a centre back. Not really a right back for the Gavra, but he's been tested there, but he seems to be a centre back. What would you say? So you're looking at Khusanov as a footballer. What can City fans and what can Pep, I guess, expect? What are his strengths as a centre back?
It's really interesting because I was actually reading about Vitor Reis and his proposed signing for City, and there were parallels there with John Stones. I think to me, Khusanov, the parallels are probably more apt with somebody like a Ruben Dias. And I think you're looking at a player who is extremely good and will get even better in the future in terms of intercepting the ball, basically getting blocks in, doing the physical stuff without sort of being too rash. Obviously, we're talking about somebody who is still in very early stages of his development, somebody who is going to need time and work in order to reach his highest possible level. But the potential is immense. And I think if you look at somebody's, development over, say, a 2-year span at that kind of age, I think we could be talking about a potentially, elite kind of brawny defender come 2 years time, say in 2026 or 27.
So a physical defender, basically. Like Diaz, of course, is the kind of defender that excels in the sort of nitty gritty defending. Like he likes to be there, in the war, doesn't he? He loves to throw his body on the line. Is he good in the air, by the way, Khusanov? Because Diaz obviously loves all that physical stuff. Is he? How is he in the air? Because City are one of the worst in the league right now at defending the box, so that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, he is somebody who likes to try and use his frame as much as he can. I'd say that actually you probably notice him more attacking corners when Lens have them, as opposed to sort of defending them. But that's not to say that he can't sort of be trained to address some of the shortcomings in City's play when defending set pieces. But he is definitely somebody who has a presence, and creates a bit of panic in the opposition's penalty box as well when he goes up.
What about his pace? Because a lot's been made about his pace. I'm in the strength section of this video still. I presume that's very much the right place to put his pace because I've seen clips of him sprinting back 70 yards and looking absolutely lightning quick. Yeah, is he one of those guys who's like really fast over long distance, or does he have the good acceleration too? Because some people take a while to get going. Yeah, how's his pace overall?
I mean, does have a good turn of pace, and I think his physique as well means he's not sort of weighed down too much at this moment in time because he isn't, he's not too bulky, compared to some defenders in that kind of position. Whether that's something that City sort of work on with him or not in the future, has to remain to be seen. He's not exactly a whippet like you'd expect from somebody sort of out on the wing, but he's definitely not, he's not going to be trundling back towards his own box. So I think, having that turn of pace will definitely be useful. And I think as well at this stage of his career, while he's still so young and learning and still makes the odd mistake, having that pace enables you to sort of get back and rectify any errors that you might have made. And I think City fans will have to be patient that they might see it used, in those kind of circumstances in some of his first outings. I think, though, to be honest, the big test for him, more than anything sort of physically and technically, will actually be mentally, because Lens is a very good sort of preparation ground for a move to the Premier League. It's a sizable club in France. I wouldn't say it's an absolute giant, but they're not minnows either.
Yeah.
They've got very demanding fans, very loyal fans. It's a fantastic atmosphere at the Stade Bollaert, and it prepares you well for life, game in, game out in the Premier League with that kind of hot atmosphere. I mean, Arsenal fans will attest it's not an easy place to go.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of exposure so early on in his career will mean that mentally he's not phased when, trying to sort of impose these elements of his game that, do look fairly outstanding so far in the relatively little that we've managed to see of him, given, how he's been such an overnight sensation.
Yeah, I was reading a few articles over the past week or so, and quite a lot talks about his general composure in terms of, not necessarily even on the pitch. They talk about how he approaches the game and how he's a very diligent student in terms of, he's quite quiet allegedly off the pitch, but focused on his job. Very hard working. And yeah, professional, which will more than welcome in Man City. What about his overall weaknesses? Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend any 21-year-old guy who only signed for £80,000 for Lens 18 months ago is going to be perfect. I understand that there'll be areas to improve. From your opinion, what are those areas? Oh, you might tell me I'm talking nonsense and he's perfect. I don't know, but how does he sit in terms of his readiness and what weaknesses has he got to his game?
I mean, I think if there are any sort of really visible weaknesses, maybe City wouldn't be going in for him right now. So I think that's testament to the fact that it's been very overwhelmingly positive so far since he broke into the first team and started getting minutes under his belt. But I do think it's natural, when you're talking at this kind of stage of his career, that he doesn't have the same experience that a number of his teammates have, although he has the potential. That really needs to be, channeled and handled in the right way. I also think that there's probably elements of, the team not necessarily performing to the best of their abilities when they have dropped points so far this season, even if it's been a relatively decent start for them, all things considered, with the exception, obviously, of going out in Europe. And, I think looking at some of those games where they haven't performed as well, probably gives a few indicators as to where he can, work to improve on his game. But I think, like I said earlier, City being this confident about him this early in his career and with such a relatively small sample size in terms of the minutes that he's played, I think that speaks volumes about just how, overwhelmingly positive his performances have been and how that's been received so far during his time in France. There's no sort of discernible weakness where you say, right, it's going to take him, a couple of years to really work on this. And maybe, unfortunately for City, in one of his first outings, maybe a weakness starts to become a little bit obvious with the change of style of football from Ligue 1 to the Premier League. But then again, Ligue 1, generally speaking, has always prepared players quite well for the jump
Yeah.
to the Premier League. And I think if he can hit the ground running and get it build up a little bit of momentum early on, I think really sky's the limit for him.
What about his suitability for like Pep's football in general? Because obviously we know he's strong, he's aggressive. You have to be technically smart. You have to be very comfortable on the ball. Like, are there signs that he's, I'm not expecting, I don't know, I think of someone like Laporte who was just immense on the ball, and like pinging 70-yard passes, for diagonal. But then you've got someone like Ruben Diaz who's perfectly good, he's not as progressive as that, but still perfectly comfortable, can play the ball and is rarely in trouble, when pressed. Where does he sit on that sort of matrix? Has he got a little bit to learn there, or is he pretty comfortable? How is he technically?
I mean, I think the term that probably suits him best is like a player project, where City will look at him and say, like, right, how do we get him sort of on the pathway to being, similar to Diaz and possibly being the heir to his position in the first team one day, and sort of bringing him on a developmental journey to create essentially an alternative to the Portuguese international. So that, for me, I think would be the obvious casting for him. Certainly in this current City under Pep. What happens potentially after Pep? I mean, I know that he's extended his contract until 2027, but you'd assume that Khusanov, unless something goes disastrously wrong, will still be there and will probably really only be coming into his own as a potential member of the starting 11 sometime between 2025 and 2027. So, I do think that there is that potential sort of 2-season runway, to develop him and work on certain aspects of his technical game where, maybe he does, start to develop some of those abilities like you were mentioning from Laporte. But I don't think, at least not to me, from what I've seen from his time in Ligue 1 with Lens, that he will necessarily be that kind of player. And that's why, when I was reading about the move for 𝙏𝙬𝙨𝙩𝙬𝙧, that struck me that he would probably be the more technical of the potential future central defensive pairing, and Khusanov would kind of be the brawny, more physical element in that.
Is he ever caught out? I've noticed he goes to ground a lot. How's his decision making? Because I've seen a lot of clips of him barreling through people, sliding a little bit. Like Otamendi was a big fan of that, at Man City. And sometimes that caused trouble. Sometimes it was brilliant, and he was in the 17-18 Premier League team of the season under Guardiola and the 100 points one. But occasionally it could end up being rash. Now, I'm only commenting on the odd clip here, but how is he? Is his tendency to go to ground a problem, or has he been fine with it so far?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily been a problem. I think, at the point of his career that he's at, it's normal that there will be sort of aspects to work on, and perhaps working on going to ground a little bit later than he has been so far in his career is something that City will identify from day one and want him to try and take in hand. I would say that in terms of his discipline, he is already fairly reserved. I mean, yes, he is capable of, imposing himself physically and being very uncompromising. But, I wouldn't say necessarily that he would strike me as a kind of rash player.
Okay.
I'd say he just needs to be a little bit more refined in terms of the way that he can use that. But I think what makes him so impressive at this stage of his career is that he's already fairly polished in that respect compared to where people would probably expect him to be, given this, overnight rise that he's enjoyed.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a presumption that because a guy is so obviously physical, he's strong, he's aggressive, blah, blah, that he won't be, there must be a downside, that he might not be able to pass very well. But it sounds like you're like a big fan of him in general, like you think he's a really smart footballer. And I know a couple of people who work in football, one guy in particular, he's really excited by him, really excited. He thinks he's the only thing he hasn't got is age on his side. And I think he thinks City are actually a bit ahead of the game here in terms of getting a potential superstar. But that's obviously just one guy's opinion. What do you think his immediate squad role will be at Man City? Because that's sort of the final thing I want to talk about. I know you talked about a long, term build up. I mean, are you expecting him personally to be sat on the bench for a while? Obviously we know like City fans will know they've had a lot of injury problems. Diaz has been out, Stones can barely stay fit. Kanji, it feels like he's playing with his tank half empty, and same for Ake a lot. So there has been defensive issues for City. Will not be able to keep players on the pitch. That might lead to him play a bit more than maybe initially planned. But if, in an ideal world, do you think he's ready essentially to play in the Premier League? A lot because of the demands of Manchester City are, well, the best in the world. Like City are aiming to win everything. Maybe not this season, but that's been the standard under Guardiola. Can he? What do you think his squad role will be for the rest of this season? And then can he break into the team regularly pretty soon, or maybe next year?
I certainly think that he'd be ready for a bit of first team action if called upon. I don't know sort of what we'd be looking at in terms of his potential first game availability. Once the deal does get done, but I certainly think that he'd be ready and would certainly benefit from sort of getting out on the field. And sort of getting some early minutes under his belt as quickly as possible. I do think that he will have to be prepared for, a bit of a sort of watching brief. And, if City's uptick in form recently or relatively recently can continue, then I think it becomes a little bit easier for Guardiola to sort of identify where he can potentially throw him in and give him a few minutes and the games to possibly avoid. I mean, with all due respect to sort of the situation right now in terms of the title race, I guess that means that there's not sort of as much risk given the sizable gap, to the top.
Yeah.
In time, and because of that, I think you could likely see not just Khusanov, but a number of these, January signings potentially bled into the team quite quickly. Because I think the sooner that Guardiola is able to revitalize this squad to an extent, I think the more likely the uptick in form is going to be able to sort of stay. I think quite clearly there seems to have been a little bit of a malaise. Within the squad in the last couple of months, players, not really quite set on being there anymore, and some who, have, fallen upon hard times towards the twilight of their career. And, I think bringing in this kind of new blood brings, a bit of new energy, and I think those guys will be extremely keen to impress early on. And, perhaps all it takes is, one or two good cameo performances, and then suddenly maybe Khusanov is, a candidate to potentially start, especially if the defensive problems from earlier this season continue for the remainder of the campaign, because Guardiola at some point will have no option but to sort of turn to these winter reinforcements and say, right, now's your time to show, why we've gone out and brought you in. And I think as well, having these new options means that Guardiola will sort of, be doing a little bit less of, sort of putting, players playing out of position and asking them to do stuff that they're not particularly comfortable with. And maybe we'll see City experimenting as well with Khusanov in the same way that Lens did, when he first arrived in terms of his position.
Well, one powerful, rampaging, pacey defender, Kyle Walker, looks like he's about to leave. So who knows? Maybe there's a transition there as well for him. I mean, as we're recording this, it's before the Ipswich game, the day he's doing his medical. So I'll probably put this out when he signs. So this might be a little bit dated, but City's run the fixtures isn't kind for any new signings. PSG, Chelsea, they got Club Brugge then in the Champions League, but after that, Arsenal. Then he got Leyton Orient, but Arsenal, Newcastle, Liverpool, Spurs, Forest, Brighton. It's a horrible run of form for City. And then, of course, City's aim now, I mean, we know the league's gone, but it's top four. Like, it's a real tough balance to try and, they have to get top four. They have to get Champions League football. It's almost inexcusable for City not to reach that. And as we're currently recording this, they're 3 points off Newcastle in fourth. And Guardiola will feel, that's an aim, and that's why these players will come in. But I'll be very fascinated to see how Khusanov, fits into this. I'm personally expecting him to be sort of eased in. I don't think he'll come in and immediately be thrown in. But who knows? Sometimes these players, he's obviously had a lot of he's had a really interesting rise to where he's at right now, and he's got the the weight of a country on his shoulders. I'm not even exaggerating. I was reading an article saying he's the most famous man in Uzbekistan right now, you know. So that is going to be a lot for him, and who knows, maybe he can carry it on those broad shoulders. Jonathan, thank you so much, mate, for joining me. It's been massively appreciated. It's been fascinating as well. Guys, please go check out Jonathan, of course, on social media, the link in the description. John_LeGossip is his Twitter, or X, sorry, these days. I'm still calling it Twitter. And I'll put a link, all that kind of stuff. Jonathan, thank you so much, mate. It's been really appreciated.
No, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure, and fingers crossed that he does get out onto the pitch and show what he can do. To be honest, if the transfer had fallen in slightly different timing, he could have gone from playing 4-0 against PSG in Ligue 1 to playing against them with City in the Champions League. But he played against PSG recently enough and didn't look out of his depth. So if he was to potentially, be involved at some point soon, I think he's definitely capable of going up against that level of team. But very, very keen to see how things develop for him, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye out.
Who knows? He might be involved. He might be involved because, I think he'll be done inside the next day or two as we're recording this, and he could be registered by then. So we'll see. Jonathan, top bloke, thank you so much, guys. Please let me know what you think of our new signing in the comments below. What your expectations are for him for the rest of the season and going ahead. For now, though, please give the video a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll catch you very, very soon.